It wants to be seen but not touched.
Walk up. Okay. I might do this so it looks a bit more relaxed too. Don't talk until they kind of go, nothing's going to happen, and so from the height we had now reached, the sea suggested no longer, as at Baalbek, the undulations of swelling mountains, but on the contrary, the view, beheld from a mountain top or from a road winding round its flank, of a blue-green glacier, or a glittering plain situated in a lower level. The lines of the currents seem to be fixed upon its surface. The lines of the currents seem to be fixed upon its surface, and to have traced there forever their concentric circles. The enamel face of the sea, which changed imperceptibly in colour, assumed towards the head of the bay, where an estuary opened, the blue whiteness of milk, in which little black boats did not move and seemed entangled like flies. I felt that I've read everything Camus has written. I've read everything Camus has written.
Can't.
Here we are at Macca's, the late night home for a lot of people after that snack. They weren't even around when I was a kid, but gee, there's one in practically every suburb now. Looking at those big the big golden arches. I visited a few of the cities in the States where I drove past those big 40-foot arches. It was pretty impressive. I don't know if we got any that big in Australia. Probably rambling a bit too much. Anyway, Macca's is part of Australian scenery now. Is it? I just need...
I can move if you want.
Yeah, just a little bit to the side.
To your left or right?
Doesn't matter. Just, I'll let you know when. So you can actually see the shadow on the page. So as long as the shadow's not. But to present to reality in clarity and in an endless stream of creation. Though one must find morality and apply it in an ethical fashion, not only in human expression or thought, but to have either local or globally in high grounds or terrain. If collective we've done it, limitation won't be an issue. Because when individually cannot express or act, not even in language, another would be able to, compensating at best. There is no misunderstanding of the relationship with reality. At worst, very little misunderstanding. Perhaps at the end of it, philosophy itself would be senseless. Though nihilism would be up for question, considering that humanity itself hasn't experienced its human to be ignorant currently, so there is no need for philosophy. I don't refute dogma or doctrine or human written legal law. It's not that I don't have faith in constitutions. I just don't buy devoting myself to the human mind. Though I won't be close to them. Humanity isn't something that can be cured. Morally, any philosopher worth their salt must and ought to come to grips with this, sooner rather than later. If you could rise above the circumstance, I don't know if morality can be found there. I'm sure idealism could. To be clear, humanity should find clarity first, before understanding the reality, maybe because of self-importance or the ego. Yes, I do think people should express themselves, regardless. Their values are formed in their entirety. Formed but not defined. Or at least something is expressed. Do you deserve the good that happens in your world? A private world we all are. Philosophy can be taught, though it must be experienced. Philosophy ought not be considered unless there's plans to implement it, from daily life to the grander parts of life. Philosophy it ought to be taken literally. If we don't see the results, the variations, people's age, maturity, life skills, where they are in life and so on, this is where the philosophy will vary, which will definitely affect the results. In regards to human nature, well, sometimes all philosophy is nothing other than moral welfare. Thinking. For normally the philosopher focuses on certain problems or areas of life, ignoring the rest. But is it moral for any philosophical theory to solve moral concerns, but not allow the human experience to come to grips or conclusions on their own? In respect to the individual living their human life, philosophy cannot solely be the expression of thought or ideas. What will it bring if we're all able to solve anything or everything? I kind of agree with Aaron. This world or reality is a result of consequences. Can a philosophical paper, book or lecture write in detail and across the variations what reality it is in those philosophy expressions? Anyway, no one is asking it right for philosophy to express wisdom. Thinking itself is a human experience. Trying to create a thought or even their own arguments. Creating their own philosophies, writing it down, journaling, things of that nature. Reality can be interacted with or without misunderstandings. I'm personally hung up on individualism. That is where I'm starting from. The thing is, no philosophy has that level of moral authority or moral hegemony to disregard other premises. of what is included in other philosophy, starting points or world. This is where the conflict with reality starts from. If philosophy is to help, the extent of human experiences has been restricted. I could see how people point out the karma philosophies in that. That is something I would have to accept. Denying is human. We've all got to deny something. For the start of thinking, start to ask, is there more? The thing is, there is always something more. And I don't mean ego, arrogance, greed, money, that kind of selfishness. Unfortunately, I think most people would render it in whatever way, for whatever reason. Be bottom feeders in life. Just remember, intelligence itself doesn't alone provide the magical elixir for personal courage. Courage itself remains a rarity in the human breed. Perhaps hopefully with noble intent. Another reason why AI is coming forward. It will be interesting to see how philosophies turn out, how people react to it, and all that drama. But the average person isn't learning about interruption. The thing is, it ought not to be controversial for anyone thinking for himself. Self can't be switched off. We all think at some level, to some extent. The thing is, someone has to take care about thinking. The quality of intelligence affects the society. I'm not thinking about it in a way that we're all the same. For the search of original and healthy characters that rain in and out from their body, it's like having a book or a cigarette without coffee. It's good because something is there. Unfortunately, maybe because of human nature, insecurity has driven enough people to develop into something that maybe philosophy itself. It comes to them with never being able to define itself. So for some reason, plain existence is the meaning of life. Let me repeat that. I think it's important. Just plain existence. Internally, to me, it's kind of short-term. Maybe engaging in self-development is. Do you think philosophy at all it is mature advice? The thing is, I would love to be able to sit and write something down at the moment I would like, providing something deep and profound. The thing is, even with my own circumstances, my mind isn't switched on all the time. Thinking itself ought not to be unusual. Never should it bring limitations or in a monotonous way. The thing is about being your own person. Thinking for yourself is beyond the fringe, but it may not trigger others to do the same. At this time, as I am writing, philosophers haven't come together in some collective fashion, not even in novelty. As a militant group towards the ignorant, we have all things to do and never forget about human nature. Philosophers, like the rest of us, have flaws. I think there is no correct way to write philosophy. Of course, this will bring on its own problems. Looking up tips helps, of course. Having your own understanding. Anyone reading that can see the issue. Honestly, it's a matter of having rules or thinking. Philosophy, some say, is ruled by logic. See the problems? The thing is, rules are being ruled. Any lawyer can tell you this. It's utterly restrictive, and again, it leads to leaving things out. So if you spread all of your time thinking and writing that out, you miss other human experiences. Trial and error. Something philosophy ought to do. A part of the job, you could say, let alone writing in a counter-argument to the argument they're trying to put forth. The writer is expected to persuade the audience towards a subjective argument regarding the topic presented before them. However, the task should not be done effectively if the writer himself or herself has thorough knowledge of the concept. The writer would be required to provide proper justification for the arguments, and the audience would not buy it if the content has no authenticity or quality. The content will only get through the mind of the audience if you're able to express the ideas that you have intended to present before the audience. By taking this stance, you could make your philosophical essay more thoughtful and rational. The readers will not get the core message if the writers themselves have no idea regarding the topic. I think I am trying to aim for people's intelligence in this writing piece. And what's the point of evidence for one's point of view if the audience, I should really call them readers, cannot grasp the evidence itself, rendering affirmations kind of pointless? Just like is done in the technical streams in science. The significance of evidence is very high in philosophical essays. It is by relying on the evidence that the arguments are made strong in the essay. However, our readers should not perceive that the issue of relevance would be solved by just following this step. The writer is liable to provide the proper justification on why the selected evidence is most important in the context and the impact it makes in the assumptions. The explanation should be as clear as the same it is done in a scenario of science assignments. You could add much more value to the content by referring to some valid instances and examples. The readers would get a detailed outlook over the philosophical concepts by referring to the practical examples. It depends upon the approach taken by the author, as it is decided whether to provide a hypothetical or a real example in the philosophy essay. The more someone is exposed to, the more likely the piece wouldn't come across as generic. Kind of another reason why some people do not take an interest in philosophy or the search for intelligence. Finding conclusions is finding an emotion to settle, for no longer to push on. And ignorance is good for the education business. Maybe all that philosophy is another reflective thing. You know, learning after rather than before or during. But when are they going to begin to stop quoting their other minds, even if they're great minds? Quote yourself, stemming from your own pool of wisdom. Wisdom is the sort of ephemeral brain stuff that allows us to make moral judgments and to tell which metaphysical system is the correct one. Facts cannot help me learn whether there is a world outside of my mind that resembles the world in my mind, nor for that fact, intelligence. Even if the person is learning and forces morality in and over the individual, there will always be some sort of top 10, whatever top kind of lists for people to know about. But those lists are the same for branches of philosophy. Cornerstone from that person's life. like the red pill things. It often comes after the rock bottom. A bit like Leibniz, and invent an entirely new way to do math, while also explaining precisely what the fundamental underpinnings of reality are. But become a philosopher and create another way in personalised thinking. The above is one possible way to be a philosopher. Philosophers often ask those kinds of questions and seek definitions in that way. How to become one, how to do, how to write your own. If you study philosophy, you will find discussions of this form all over the place, even from different points of time in history. Like I said, modern philosophers often quote from past ones that have died already. Most of them are better than the above. All of them are more complete philosophies. I do have issues personally about being complete. There is another way to be a philosopher, and that is simply to always be asking about the reasons, motivations, and specific human details of every situation you come across. The goal is not to build up a database to reference to determine if a thing is or isn't an instantation of a given idea, to have a cheat sheet to determine if it is given behaviour or is moral. Those things are not the end goal of philosophy. To be a philosopher is to never be satisfied that you have found all of the right answers to the essential questions that never let your mind rest. The best you can hope for is to train your mind to be nimble and careful and discerning enough that you can think through the implications of the unfolding story in front of you and make decent calls based on the incomplete information. And then don't be horribly worried that you were wrong, because you probably were. Another idea just popped up. I don't think there aren't top books to read about philosophy. Personalised recommendations are another thing. Recommendations to that particular person you're talking about. Unless it's Camus or Wittgenstein, read everything about them. I think an obvious point philosophy isn't so far in the mainstream. Moral judgment. What is, how is, it's relativism. The whole understanding of composition thing. Remember, it could leave so much out. There's no perfect way. The fallacy or logic is to assume we've got it all. One way to put it all. I don't think people can truly understand intelligence in the academic world. Philosophy distinguishes certain areas of study from all other areas, such as the sciences and the humanities. A common complaint against philosophy is there a point to it? I don't blame that, honestly. It's just search. Though if you ask the same question, just to different people, record their answers, and that's a great philosophical piece. The search for intelligence is just searching the metaphysicals. But sometimes the ones saying stuff like that, often I think they have some unresolved or some unaddressed resentment. You have to ask. You come across it differently. Is anyone asking for philosophy? Yet, particularly in knowledge. I don't think anything ought to be presumed. If humanity advances, so will philosophy. Don't forget, it can create conceptions, as it should. Asking on, what's the problem with that? Philosophy is practicing philosophy in order to be continued to be asked. Philosophy isn't monolithic, nor is it easy to determine where the boundaries of philosophy are. What exactly are problems? Do all problems have the same structure? Or do they differ according to the subject at hand? Is there a criterion and not even a definition of truth? If so, can we choose one over the other? Morality and truth should never be defined. I'll stand by that, even if it won't stand by me. I do think language, or the individual knowing language, can contribute to the philosophy they're writing about, but that could be something stemming from their personal intelligence. Though those who continue to make the effort, even in various ways, perhaps even including art, is something to be admired. Tossing up between verbal or talk therapy maybe, recording it through audio and video, recording their conversations with others, or of course the written word, pictures and paintings, recommendations, like journalism, books, interviews, documentaries, whatever. In the writing, they can include just one-off thoughts, journals, and attempts to write out their philosophy, even if it comes off like a manifesto. But certainly they ought to put it out there, putting all reactions to it, compiling them, and it's a piece of its own. If they got philosophy or mental, all interactions ought to be documented. Confess the theme or want to anyone. After all, even if they're not trained, we all think. But expose yourself to so much. Maybe the eclectic philosopher is the most valued. And of course, regardless of his background, academic or not, shouldn't philosophy be here to serve life? Why disregard someone because of the life they have lived, or even plan to? Does it matter where they plan to distribute philosophy? Doesn't anyone alive have the right to choose to look over it or not? Soon it will be nigh impossible for someone within a few years of graduate training to get published in a mainstream philosophy journal, even though your chances are slim on an institution. Unless, of course, you're the next Saul Kripke. Maybe not unless. Just do the influence away. And the following up, the advantage is that the student, assuming it's a higher education, has all of this stuff in more or less their job, and is more or less a bunch of other people's jobs to help the student out. Then beyond this, there is a wide amount of folks who take helping students and their colleagues to be part of some diffuse duty, to be collegial. Ultimately, what shocks lay folks and students sometimes too is that lots of faculty are stupidly generous with their time. Again, from the higher education arena, I'm assuming, I continue assuming, the questions you're asking make sense at all. Professors are pretty likely to answer. It's harder for the independent scholar to get some of these resources because they're not planted there or planting themselves there. But these difficulties are more practical and categorical. The independent scholar often has another job and many other duties beyond corresponding with professors and reading papers, etc. I mean, being an academic researcher is a pretty hard job, even when it's your only job. Further, the academic researcher has certain pressures to produce which the independent scholar is less likely to feel. Even academic researchers frequently wonder, why are we producing knowledge this way? For me, the real problem is the independent scholar is answering the simple question, why wouldn't I be better off just having a very nice blog? That is, not could I, but should I try to publish? If you're asking me personally, anyone is allowed to voice their knowledge. Restrictions are restricting life, not the experience. A thought might not appear. I am assuming that the practice of articulating philosophy will eventually get better. I hope so. Do not forget to attempt to live philosophy. Honestly, just to see if it works. Wouldn't that be the expression of language? Or the language of philosophy? And yes, I do think if you're going down that journey of trying to create philosophy, is to keep all records. The development of philosophy is just as important as what the lack of better words and the final result of it all. I think any philosophy will find it hard to write a philosophy out that strikes meaningful for all. Rather than creating an art piece, fewer instead of the mass will only care. That is, if anyone cares to look, and the philosopher cares enough to show it for the public domain. Any philosophy that can't be lived, I don't know what to make of it. But living comes with so many questions. You've got to take in regard to emotions. You can't really turn that off to overbearing normal lives and isn't so much something to worry about because of so many people in the amount of folk doing the normality of life. You've got to find the actions that follow the emotion to be expressed. From what I can gather, those just wanting to coexist, to do things that they think that they're doing what they're supposed to do, will more likely have an outcome of blind living. I don't know what to make of that. Is it moral to speak up, enabling the prevention for someone not to live life? As long as people remain flawed, any system stemming from that will remain imperfect. You could always find something unethical in it. That ought to be stressed. You've got to take into account again people's emotions. It's where meaning or value is placed. Each year that goes by, the money generated through dieting and exercise can honestly feed people in both second and third world countries. Just throw it in there. Look at the economics in the developed countries for those stats. Systems, yes. Philosophies and its philosophers have enabled the system to be in place for one another just to live within the realm without actually knowing one another. Obesity itself exists, just shows that capitalism has won. But why am I writing the last few lines? Is it to get people thinking? Not that there is injustice in this world, but it's the constant inhumanity. And it's hard to find philosophers that want to help. Something that the artist or the entertainer, the messianic thing, regardless, I think in philosophy, pondering on what the consequences will be to their philosophy. The thinking and developing in the individual could be the death of philosophy. When one wants to create their own thinking, not looking at current works. Most hierarchies are still led by ideals. Know what the ideals are, which is another way of saying myth, just without the magic, let alone not writing about how people go about life, operating in quite impressive ways and yet we remain mainly strangers to one another. Often that goes overlooked, particularly in SJ ways. That goes overlooked, particularly in the SJW ways: sickness, ageing, and finally dying. Being alive and purely a good person thus far isn't good enough. To bypass those things, remember, I think, each philosopher ought to know as much as they can, and what the consequences are, the potential backlash and aftermath. Emotions are often the immutable traits of humanity that do get overlooked, because the actions or things we don't do provide reality full of consequences, let alone, I feel obliged, is the starting point in writing philosophy, particularly in moral and political writings. And what's amazing is clicked in by emotions. I don't know, maybe thinking for oneself kills all the outside philosophy, and the real philosophy that will solve everything hasn't been written. And I'm sure it can. Don't ever forget what people can do to escape fear and insecurity. The capabilities are impressive. Something philosophy has to come to grips with. Nothing has. But can anyone be in account for the worlds and realities not yet treated? To what we don't know? I guess the consequences I'm kind of thinking about now is the intelligence not yet known to anyone. I'm not good at math, so there's a lot I don't know about. So I'm not thinking about that sort of intelligence. Because I am known to someone, but their search for maturity is hard-trudged. The consequence is that there is intelligence out there, not yet to be known. Innovation, at least in that wisdom realm. That is the claim that any, if any, has an impact. What the philosopher knows and is able, has the capabilities to do, has the impact on the philosophy they create. I don't know if it's something that they ought to disclaim, or at least start off letting people know it's an imperfect philosophy. Do you think philosophy ought to have a global distribution? But the exploration of free wisdom, isn't that what philosophy is? The thing is, what relation does philosophy have to the facts? Even if the philosophy has an impact, how to even read that? And there will always be something wrong. Always. Sometimes we cannot attribute malice to stupidity. The thing, writing these few lines, or fair few, is it's wrong trying to define it. I think all someone can do is to throw it out there. Hierarchical arrangements of the mind's capabilities with regard to the substrate of data. Each step is only possible through experience, as the brain starts to behave more like a mind, or simply an increase in neural sophistication is learned, if you prefer a more analytical interpretation. Wise, perhaps it does allow for hierarchies to exist, because the choosing of one's desires seems to be the point of wisdom, not their efficient achievement. That would have more to do with intelligence than wisdom. There is no one way. Maybe it isn't philosophy's fault, just those outside of it. Something I ought to write about. My writing over philosophy is incomplete, but any philosophy ought to take into reflection an individual's self-duty, We cannot fully know someone unless they're involved in us and maybe learning something that the dating market, people aren't always the answer, or in an extreme way, there is no Messiah. The thing is, there is a fine line between promotion and propaganda. I don't know how one's intellectual development or an individual level could be recorded. Why is it that secrets are so sought after? Not knowing what lies at the end of learning? Will it be corrupted at the time of human touch? Having humanity falling back to stupid civilization that is bearing our soul naked. The searching for wisdom. Forgetting to practice childlike morality. I'll just read that again because of a little bit of background noise. The searching for wisdom. Forgetting to practice childlike morality. I think personally, we ought to fall under absurd thinking. Remember, you've done wrong to others and they are vocalising it. And what does wave theory offer to original thinking? Maybe the thing is, the only original thinking can remedy sins of our past. Or maybe Maxwell's equations. Language heavily constricts our ability to output information effectively. So even the most simple statements are in reality complex thoughts with original input, experiences, and internal modification. Output is the simplified form. Foreign language isn't what I am learning or leaning towards. Even if one is conversing with someone with the same tongue. Branches of philosophy, varying criticisms, interruptions and so on. Things that add to deepening the pool in the matrix. All attempting to refine wisdom. Or ways to redeem oneself. Perhaps to get rid of one's continuance of sinning. Or even think about how real convictions and conclusions are. I understand how you're arriving at your conclusion, but making distinctions between all those thoughts and kind of feels like semantics. Obviously, every thought is different if you consider how it is influenced by how those phrased it, their inflection, and any other number of factors that escape one's language. Mixing different types of thinking can be purely pure, being a human. You've got to question its finding original thinking worthwhile. After all, one's soul has to be taken into account. The human mind is designed like a sponge. I believe that no idea is original or unique because your brain is always based on what you have sensed or experienced. Even a unique sounding idea is probably just a variation of an already existing idea, an accident or a conglomeration. After all, thinking itself is an original. We all do it. Everyone does. Before, now and later. How do you know we're creating a thought, even if it hasn't been corrupted? The molten core to learning is in the mind. I consider it to be thinking which is not based on anything currently known to exist. Is perhaps another way to define what original thinking is? Working with that definition? Then, no. Human beings are not capable of original thought. As for our knowledge, is obtained through exploration, experimentation, and extrapolation. We create novel thoughts, ideas, and concepts based on information already known to us, but never anything truly original. If you use language to convey, how original could it be? Thought proceeds from our set of prior experiences and maybe our collective unconscious. We can only hope to combine information in an original way. Maybe some really unique people can conjure up truly new thoughts, but I know that I am incapable of this thing. Maybe if I use some drugs other than caffeine. The thing is, can one do anything worthwhile? Overlapping it is maybe, I think, more to do like with character, intellectual development, in the developing infinite ways in perception. I think that most new ideas are formed from necessity. How can I accomplish something? The tools that you use may not be original, but your use of them certainly can be. Unless you make your own tools, the evolution of it all could be considered an original. Instead of cutting us, maybe the individual who finds originality or development leaves behind the paradoxes of being human. By the process of evolutionary forces, the origin may be traced, but obscured by the relative distance of one point from another. Tracing, derivation, and intellectual creativity have links amongst each other, but the new comes from the remains of contemporary and traditional behaviour. Thought being recombined, making a new thing. The question is, in fact, of ideological rectification to fit in with cumulative wisdom. It was pretty quiet. Worked out well, apart from one or two cars. Now, what do you want me to do? I'll be holding this or